sounds better.
Dunedin's waterfront, an industrial and commercial area, not at first glance the obvious place to race cars, unless you happen to be something of a visionary. In 1953, Bob Oakley, speed convener for the young Otago Sports Car Club, saw its potential. Wide streets around the perimeter, good for racing and good for spectators. A network of streets internally, which meant that all parts of the track were accessible. Now, the club wasn't cash rich, but it did have the right connections. President Percy Lapp also happened to be secretary of what was to become New Zealand Motorsport's governing body. And yes, if the Otago Club, now with the city behind it and enhanced by an independent council of enthusiasts, if they could organise a race of 75 miles and offer a first prize of £150, then it was all go. Given the right day, and of course not competing with other meetings. So the Met Office was consulted, and they said that Queen's birthday weekend was most often dry and cold, and so it proved to be. Scott Thomson takes up the story of the 1953 road race.
June the 1st, 1953. In London, the crowds are waiting for the coronation. From the Himalayas comes the news Everest has been climbed. And in Dunedin, the Otago Sports Car Club are organising New Zealand's first street race. The circuit runs along Friat Street past the pits, onto a gravel section, over a tricky bridge, to the S-bend at McGregor's, the Lone and Mercantile corner, and 1.75 miles back to the start. Dunedin drivers warm up for the time trials. Sybil Lupp, Dr. Bruce Hay in their Jaguars, John Horton in number 7 ex-Lupp MG. New Zealand motor racing is becoming a three-cornered battle between imported cars like Ron Roycroft's number 19, the veteran Alfa Romeo, and New Zealand-built specials like Doug Haig's number 18, the Citroën, with the engine at the back, and the triangles completed by road-going sports cars like the Red Allard of Jack Tutton. Class events like this have been a long time coming. Muriwai, 1928. 10-year-old Ron Roycroft's not a happy lad. There goes the family Bugatti, sold for Kipple Cutton to drive in the New Zealand Motor Cup meeting. Cutton will handle number 5, the ex-Zoborowski Miller racing car, in the big race, the New Zealand Motor Cup. The Bugatti's for the light car race. A busy day. He tries out the Bugatti. And there's a more recent Bugatti here. Charlie East is leading the Australian contingent. How will the supercharged 1500 stand up on the sand against the old veterans, the big displacement Stutz and Sunbeam? Advanax on the bonnet advertises retreads, an early example of commercialism. What would the VCC have to say about that? The Bugatti's warmed up. Does a broadside and lines up with the Parry Thomas Special, built at Brooklands, England, and Dad Roycroft's old Bugatti. The pace car's ready. A rolling start. The light car cup goes trans-Tasman. But the big one, the New Zealand Motor Cup, stays with Bob Wilson, third time out with the Stutz veteran. Bob Gibbons remembers the car well.
The Stutz was later still, and I was apprenticed to the firm of, I think it was the Morris people in Wanganui, and it was came to be parked in the garage where I worked, and it seemed to me quite a good idea to give it a run. Well, the first thing that happened, I got a friend with me, was that we met a mob of sheep in the main street floor, and the lower part of the main street of Wanganui, and Trevor was very impressed because he'd never seen a mob of sheep disperse so quickly. It was a very noisy exhaust, and we drove it out along the main road to the south. There's a straight about 5 miles south of Wanganui, and the speedometer was there was no speedometer, but the rev counter was marked in time as speed marks, and 3,000 revs had 100 miles an hour against it. So we assumed that at 3,000 revs it was doing 100 miles an hour, and we coaxed it up to 100 miles an hour down the Marangay Strait. It was quite impressive. The first time either of us ever went at 100 miles an hour. The car stood up with it, but it was a very exciting ride, actually. A bit naughty. It was steady, quite a big steering wheel, and it had a very hefty exhaust. No, it held the road really well. There was a dip in the road I was a bit worried about, but it went through it no trouble. And we turned round and came home very pleased with ourselves.
Second man Bill Hamilton will go on to pioneer the jet boat concept. But depression and war bogged down big-time racing in New Zealand. Ron Roycroft has to go and design the ideal car with his Meccano set. Mechanically minded young people are discharged from the armed services. In 1948 they're at this fun event near Christchurch. The letters GP mean general purpose, Jeep to these people, not Grand Prix. Maurice Stanton's putting the engine behind the driver. Now that's an idea. It's actually a front-wheel drive BSA when it's going in the right direction, and they've added a fourth wheel for what was originally a three-wheeler. Stanton brothers make it to the top. Scotland Yard's flying squad originally used the Wolseley engine in this single-seater. Heck Green has built it in Christchurch. He's easily fastest. Tom Clements in his vintage Fiat is best of the small displacement standard cars. You can ask too much of the family saloon. Fred Sharman's Railton has too much power and spins the wheels. Graham Green drives his brother's single-seater. It's good development for the 100 miles race that these chaps want to organise.
Heck Green was part of a tradition of fine engineering in Christchurch that continues with the likes of Peter Shasky here behind me, working away in auto restorations. Peter, what are you doing this morning?
Oh, just making some bits and pieces for these old cars that we work on.
You've got a bit of literature there too. Does that relate to Heck Green that we've been talking about?
Yes, it does. As a schoolboy, Frank Remick and I, we were very avid fans of Heck Green. We used to follow all his progress for his various cars, and I think he was marvellous, a brilliant engineer.
Was he part of your schooling?
No, the only thing that connected with the school was every morning he went past our school going to his place where he worked, and Frank and I would rush to the window and say, "There's Heck!" and get reprimanded by the teacher. And the Wolseley used to just go very quietly past the school, and then further along the road the houses finished, and you'd hear this thing splutter along there, and suddenly it was up and running through the gears, sounded magnificent.
This was the first of his racing specials, wasn't it?
This was the Wolseley.
The single-seater?
The single-seater Wolseley with an aluminium body, number 13.
Why 13?
I think that the street that he lived in was Meadow Street in Papanui, and I'm pretty near sure that his house number was 13.
And that's the car that took part in the first Lady Wigram and then won the second one. Is that correct?
That's the one, yes.
Now, also he was, at the same time, he was building a car for Pat Hoare.
Yes. Yes.
What was the power plant of that car?
Well, it started off with a Singer engine, and then it became the RA Vauxhall with the Vauxhall engine, and finally it wound up as the 260M Zephyr, which is still running today.
And almost immediately he went into a third project, which I seem to remember had Fiat components, and then took massive increases of engine size.
That's the one that now has the Lycoming in, owned by Duncan Rutherford.
Yes.
It started off as the RA Fiat.
We chuck this phrase around about Kiwi ingenuity. It seems to me that Het Green was the real thing. Would you agree with that? Backyard man.
Yes. Well, talking to Ralph Watson when he used to call in here, Ralph said Het Green was the best special build that we've ever had. Het Green says that Ralph Watson was the best special build.
Ralph built the other Lycoming.
Yeah. So you've got two men on a similar path at a similar time.
Yeah.
Wigram, February 1949. Ron Roycroft's grown through Speedway stardom at Western Springs, and he's down with an Austin 7 supercharged to challenge Green. Most of the cars are MGs, and one of them is driven by a woman, Sybil Lupp from Dunedin. How did Sybil Lupp get involved with cars? Her daughter, Bev Mooney.
Well, my earliest memory of Sybil getting involved with cars was at Hawkesbury. My uncle and my grandfather, all their cars were just serviced at home, at the farm. Everything was done there. The MGs and the Bentley. There was huge rivalry between Rod and Sybil over their cars, whose could be made to go the fastest. But my grandfather's Bentley had them beat all the way, up the Delta Road. They used to test them. Sybil's engineering and mechanical skills seemed to come at home because everything was done at the farm. Nothing was ever taken to a garage. It was always pulled to bits at home.
On the right, Frank Bennett's Black Invicta takes pole position for the first Lady Wigram Trophy. Green gets a wizard start and goes into the lead, followed by Don Ransley's Riley and Roycroft. And then Maury Proctor's Blue Riley, seen in this recreation. 35,000 people turned out to see the 23 cars race for 100 miles, New Zealand's first serious sealed circuit event. The tar was made sticky by the heat, and in the archive film we see Proctor slide as he tries to hold Roycroft's Austin on the hairpin at the back of the circuit. Pat Hoare in the unfinished green car. And Sybil Lupp passes another MG with her number 9. She's going well. Green and Roycroft go head to head. They're both back after pit stops. Pat Hoare has stopped for good. The 80-mile mark, Maury Proctor's Riley goes into the lead and holds it. He wins the Lady Wigram Trophy from Frank Bennett's Invicta and Ransley in another Riley. Green and Lupp are right up there too. Roycroft is delayed by tyre wear and has 2 pit stops, but he wins the handicap award.
Leon, this was the winner.
It was.
What sort of average speed did Maury Proctor put up with this car?
I've forgotten exactly, but I think it was 62, 64 mile per hour, something like that.
More than 100 kilometres an hour.
Yeah.
A lot of people today would be amazed that an 1100cc car, not supercharged, not even new at that stage, would do that speed. How did he do it?
Well, the car's got a good ability to corner very fast, and once you get the revs up, you can hold them up, and you can just keep on going around the corner, sort of flat stick all the time. And the brakes too, for the hairpin at the back and things like that, brakes extremely good. So places like that it would certainly gain, and then it's reliability.
What would be in his mind when he was setting out to do 100 miles round here?
I think just to go as fast as he could, because he was known as a bit of a cowboy and ready to press on, and enjoyed his hard motoring.
Even in 1949, this was a historic car and an old car, Leon.
Yes, an old car. It was a team car, a Riley team car, raced in one of the major events, the Tourist Trophy in Ireland,
yes.
An international event, and then it raced at Phoenix Park. After that, it went to Australia, and in 1933 won the Australian Grand Prix, Bill Thompson driving. And about 1934-5 it came to New Zealand. A man by the name of Gilpin brought it into the country and did some racing.
Riley authority, George Calder.
You use the term small, but in a lot of ways Rileys were quite heavy in their build in comparison to perhaps the MGs that was here. So I think the reason why they actually won was because they were rugged and durable, and they didn't sort of fall to bits like perhaps some of the other cars did. And that's why they won at Ards, I think, 3 times.
How fast would the car have wound out during that race, Leon?
I guess around about 84 mile per hour, somewhere in that vicinity.
Right. Fuels weren't that good.
No, well, of course, I don't know what they ran on then, but I remember using dry cleaner fluid for competition work.
Right. Yeah. It's a pretty high geared car, isn't it?
Very, very high geared. Yes, once you, there's nothing much low down, but once you get the revs up and the high revs, it works very well.
Wigram becomes an annual fixture. Green, 13, wins from Sybil Lupp. Pat Hoare, car 7, leads the submissions for law changes. Public roads will now be closed for various events. 3 major races in 1951 end Green's reign. Roycroft's Jaguar is road race champion. George Smith's V8 wins almost everywhere else. Les Moore's imported Alpha takes Wigram. Four years after the first Wigram, all the complexity of a street race in Dunedin. David Thompson talks with race originator Bob Oakley and driver Ted Reid.
I was speed convener in the Otago Sports Car Club in those days, and you know what it's like. You open your mouth with an idea and you get stuck with it.
Bob and I were talking in the corner there one night, and he said, I've got a dream about having a circuit race around the town. I said, Bob, you must be joking. But he wasn't joking, he was deadly serious.
As far as the city and the authorities were concerned, it was great. Len Wright was the mayor then, and when Tommy Thompson, that was your grandfather, approached Len Wright, he couldn't have had more enthusiasm. It was just simply, what can I do for you? You tell me, we're right behind you. In those days, the city had its own traffic department, and Michael Collins was the chief traffic officer. And again, he anticipated problems we wouldn't. But he said, look, just leave them to me, I'll fix those. Jim Barnes, Sir James now, was our patron.
What did you feel when you heard there was going to be a motor race here and that you'd have a chance to actually take part in a street race in Dunedin?
I was absolutely thrilled. I'd only had the Morgan about a year or so, and it was the talk of the town, and I really appreciated the idea.
Across town in the Lupp household, Sybil is involved in preparing the racing car. Percy Lupp is heavily involved in the administrative side. He's to be secretary of the Dunedin street race.
She competed a lot with the Otago Car Club. I think she and Percy were foundation members there. Yes, she did. She won a lot of trials and hill climbs, sprints. Yes, thoroughly enjoyed them. Percy was very pedantic about the rules. And when the rule books were printed, he brought them home in triumph, but it got the better of me. I went and got one, punched holes right round it, and I can remember this as plain as anything, finding some red bias binding and threading it through the rule book, full of red tape and loopholes. It did not go down well. I didn't ride my pony for many weeks afterwards for that effort.
Just getting a racing car around the country was a bit of a bind in those days too.
It wasn't altogether satisfactory towing it. We only initially towed it. Or shortly after that I had a trailer made. But I never liked driving a car on trailer, and I often used to get people to take it for me. I'd said, in fact, in that race, meeting I went to in Dunedin, yes. I said I'd only drive there if I get someone to drive me.
I can remember one holiday trip. We were going to Hawkesbury, and it was winter, and the shingle fans were running at Kaikoura. My brother and I were sent out to walk into them to see how deep they were in case Mother lost the car. I think she rather thought she'd lose us too than the car. And I do remember back to silencing these cars a little bit so that they were driven on the roads. One of the tricks that used to be done was to roll up meat-safe gauze, drill the exhaust pipe, put the roll of meat-safe gauze up the exhaust and the bolt in, go to the testing station and come home, rev the car up, blow the meat-safe gauze out until next time.
And what about the general public? What was the first they knew about there being a motor race, any sort of big motorsport event in Dunedin?
Well, one thing was going for us. At that time, the Caledonian Ground Peel was on for what's now the gymnasium out there, and they're soliciting all the organisations in Dunedin to raise money for it. So we said we'd put all the profits towards that. The first the public knew was in the ODT, front page, 90-point bold right across the front there, cars will race in city streets. On race day itself, there was a scaffolding control tower right on this piece of grass here. It was done by Bramwell's, a 4-storey structure from what I can remember, rushed up in a great hurry with communications on one level and the race controller up the top, all the things you still see today. Then in the area more around here, where that used to be radiation limited, they made ranges, champion ranges and things, and in front of there were the fire engines and the ambulances and the official cars, all that clutter of stuff that you get at any race meeting.
Right.
We commissioned a film, and quite a lot of the shots were actually taken from where we're standing now, David, at the end of the main straight, which of course is a very fast, it's a long straight here.
Sure.
And this was the hardest braking they'd have had to do in the whole circuit, coming here. And the other interesting thing was that, although this is all bitumen now, the gravel started right at this corner here.
So it was actually more like a rally for the next little bit, was it?
Oh yes, for the next 2 or 3 short straights it was on gravel, it was real gravel. And it was very dusty, although it was midwinter. The last minute we had to get Dick Skinner, who had weed and pest control at East Tyree, to bring in his spraying equipment and wet the gravel between each event.
So where did they go if something went wrong at the end of the straight here?
They went straight ahead, and this was an escape road here down to the oil tanks, and we couldn't really get the spectators who'd never seen motor racing to realise what an escape road was. And I remember at one occasion there, we had to send the crash crew down to clear it. And a fellow, John Kennedy, who didn't muck around, I remember him with a great big CO2 extinguisher going along, blasting people on the ankles to get them back out of the escape road. Highly effective, I might say.
Now, I understand that one of the top visitors from the North Island just about had to make use of this escape road in practice.
Oh, I don't think he ever had to make use of it. Ron Roycroft, driving his father's P3 Alpha, came down here in practice, I might say, not in the main race. And he didn't quite get it right this time, and he went through 360 degrees right in front of us here onto the gravel here. This was good hard gravel. There's quite a little squirt along here, and quite a few of the drivers miscued this next corner we're coming up to. There was a flag marshal on this patch of grass, and he had an exciting time here, because some drivers on the gravel and in the dust was something appalling at the time, miscued this one and went very wide. There's some real tank slappers coming up towards the overhead bridge there.
So a good spot for spectators here?
Yes, a rake of railway trucks right along the railway lines here, absolutely crowded with spectators. They hadn't paid, they'd sneaked in the back way.
And coming up here onto the bridge, this will be one of the more difficult parts of the circuit.
Yes, we're back on the bitumen right now, and cars would tend to get airborne, just coming over this hump there, just where Ted is with the Morgan now. And at the bottom of this here, there's a real dip, and trying to take a straight line through here, more or less the line I'm taking with the car now, through this dip here, it would throw them up right over the camber towards that curb and that big thick pole there. This was fast, this was top gear stuff. Now on the right here, there used to be McGregor's Foundry, a great big red shed, which obscured all the vision through here. We had to put in a sand dune right across the front of that. It was pretty effective. We had about 7 cars go into that sand dune at different times during the racing.
Right, and that was obviously a big concern to the people who had the shop, the building here, the industry.
Yes, although they all stood behind the sand dune and watched us with great glee.
And then back up here to quite a hard left?
Yes, it was an acute right angle left here. Now we're coming to a corner here, which was a sweeping left-hander, and just on the apex of it there was some railway crossings going into that building on the left there.
Right.
And between the railway lines were cobblestones, black cobblestones rounded on the top, and a strip each side, and as slippery as a pork chop. And it really was catching them out.
And then you're down here starting to focus on getting your line up for this fast, fairly blind left-hander we're coming up to.
Yes, it was very fast. When we get there, you'll see it's very open and sweeping, but it was full throttle and top one. I remember Ron Roycroft, it seemed terribly brave. He came round that corner, and Frank Shooter on the left and somebody else on the right were weaving under acceleration there, and he just went straight through them like an arrow.
And we're coming pretty much back to the start-finish line here, are we?
Yes, this is this fast corner. You can see that the line is very wide and sweeping, and right through here to the finish line.
Drivers try their first street circuit. Het Green's latest car is in advance of overseas practice, rear-engined. The RA Vanguard, it's a favourite.
Yes, it had the suspension links at the front, had double-link suspension, which were Jack Brewer and Heck had handcrafted out of aircraft propeller material with rubber band suspension using the Vanguard engine, supercharged. And all I can remember about that car is the particularly harsh exhaust note it had, because it had 4 stub pipes just that stuck up. It was very, very harsh and went very, very well.
But in practice the gearbox fails. Het Green and his driver Jack Brewer are spectators. The RA Vanguard's out. The circuit is testing specials with their production-based components. Reigning champion George Smith in his hot-rodded GCS is one who's in trouble. The engine's blown a piston. Mechanics work to try and rectify it. Veteran of Muriwai days, George knows that sometimes you just have to stand and watch. The light motorcycle-powered cars are going well. Sybil Lupp's got a coat over her racing kit. And Dr. Bruce Hayes having a cover-up too. He's H.R. Brown in the program.
Just before the race started, she grabbed my college coat off my back. Yes, that disappeared. I was left cold.
So you froze?
The lap scorer froze while she was warm, yes. Well, Mum tuned Bruce Hayes' car, and he didn't want his medical patients to know that he was racing a car. She drove it several times, and when he drove it, he became all sorts of different names. But that is the first Jaguar that Mum really drove before she bought her one from Jack Tutton.
One car's in everybody's mind.
Alfa Romeo. Most people nowadays think of Italian racing cars red Ferraris. But Enzo Ferrari was first of all the team manager for the Alfa Romeo team. And here we are sitting on a classic Alfa Romeo of that era when for a quarter of a century they dominated Grand Prix racing. Alfa Romeo owner, restorer, driver, Bill Clark. Bill, what was special about these Alfas of the vintage years?
Well, I think they were basically very easy cars to drive. I don't think anybody will dispute that fact. A lot of power, a lot of torque, and made them, frankly, quite a delight to drive. And they were extremely successful. They were well engineered. They came from very good history, pedigree, right through from the P2s and P1s, if you like. And I must admit, in the 29 years I owned mine, that it was a joy to drive and to own.
Bill, we've got what looks a very modern engine here, haven't we, with these overhead cams? Beautifully clean, typically Alfa.
Yes. You can see I think the lineage of the P3 in to some degree.
This, of course, is a 6.
This
yes.
is a 6, whereas the other's an 8.
Yeah.
Twin cam, but still the same basic attention to detail and finish and everything is very much in the P3 mould.
And the supercharger down on the front here, which in yours was on the side.
Correct.
The straight 8,
yes. Yes, but the P3 was twin superchargers, of course, which was in effect two 4s joined, two 4-cylinder engines joined end to end.
The other tricky bit, we've got this beam across the front there, which is very rare because I think there were only 4 you mentioned with that Dubonnet system of suspension. Les Boer frightened himself considerably with it. The car ducked and dived all over the place, and then it got sorted out. You had some experience of that. Could you tell us what it was all about?
When I acquired the car, we pulled it apart naturally, and we put it back as we'd found it. We then, in driving it, found that it was intended to dive, and this course was similar to what
From side to side?
Yes, it was, and particularly on the main road, any bumps on that, it was quite hair-raising at times. So this gave me some concern. What the outcome was that in that front axle, there is, as it's mounted to the chassis here, there are 2 step keys. And what had mounted, the keys had been put round the wrong way. Now this obviously had happened when Salvador had had it, and then it carried on through with Les. I think Ralph Watson had corrected it for the Roycrofts.
Yes, I think.
And then, of course, the car then went slightly downhill.
Time for the first real race. Stock cars, 25-mile handicap. Not old bombs, and not that one either. No, the cars that you can buy in the showrooms if you've got those scarce overseas funds. Murray Miners. They're going to start first. 4 of them. And Ted Reed's Drophead Miner is just behind. Godfrey Pape's White A40, it's a trade entry. The maroon and yellow car's the Everson Cherub. That's a New Zealand attempt to beat the overseas funds and build a local car. Ford 10 engine at the back, driving the front wheels through Willis Jeep components. Believe it or not, it's in its first race. Snow Smith, Speedway driver, is handling it. The times are comparable to the Miners, but it's handicapped out of contention. Lone Mercantile and Gunn leads the Miners over the tricky cobbles on lap 1. Bright is being pushed by Haggart. Haggart's not even in the programme. He's driving Godfrey Pape's wife's shopping Miner, a late entry. And Reed has them in sight. Godfrey Pape, pre-war campaigner of Fraser Nash with chain drive. The car is an icon these days, and in those days was the basis of the Otago Sports Car Club badge. Haggart's past Bright. Pape has 1:40 to make up. The fastest cars in the race are the 2.5-litre Rileys of Bill Harris and Arthur Kennard. They've passed the Cherub and will have to lap it again before they lead it on the road. The scratch car. Kennard's trying hard. Perhaps a bit too hard. Pape comes over the bridge. He's caught two of the miners. Harry Hedges Armstrong Sidley is handicapped out of the race. And there's a Riley on its own. Kennard's dropped back a few seconds. Hard as they're going, the Rileys are not really catching the leading miners fast enough. But Pape's in with a chance. He can see Ted Reid now. But there's only a couple of laps to go. Bill Ballantyne, Studebaker gets a white flag, 1 lap to go, and checkered flag for Ernie Gunn, who wins for Dunedin and Morris Minor by almost a minute. From Pape, who's caught Reid, and demoted Haggart to 4th place on the last lap. Harris and Kennard are 5th and 6th. Oh, sports cars now, you jokers. Yeah, that's what I'm going to drive when I get school cert. Yeah, maybe, Jumbo. Got to get your licence first. Do that in Mum's Minor, no sweat. Miners? Oh gosh, there's more of them. The sports car handicap. And Jim Moody from Balclutha with his 4-seater Allard. John Horton, another ex-Lup MG. There's that fellow Pape back again with a vinyl topped A90. And talking of Austin's, clubman Brian Johnson and his little 7 completes a lap. Heavy metal now. Reid in the Morgan, Tutton in the Allard, Phil Harrison and Bruce Hay in the Jags. Everybody dreams of driving a Jag these days. Just slip in behind it and rev it up and you'd be a winner. What was it really like? Ask Ted Reid.
How quickly would you have been going when you came down here and breaking into this corner onto the gravel?
Well, I hope about 83, 84 mile an hour, something like that. Slow in today's standards, but quite exciting then.
And what other sections of the circuit would have stood out in your mind as being the more difficult sections, sections that were perhaps most challenging?
I'd very much like to think of the other chap finding it difficult where he went from bitumen onto gravel, because that's where I shined. My earlier racing years was all in gravel, and bitumen rather frightened me with the stress and strain the car was under. Things were bending a little bit, but when coming from the bitumen onto the gravel, I'd hurry them, some of my competitors, onto the gravel rather fast by braking well before and taking them on the inside. And it was rather exciting, more for the competitors when they went very, very wide. There's some frightened looks on their faces that I could see in the rearview mirror. But apart from that, it was a marvellous circuit. Over the ramp, it was quite exciting when the car got semi-airborne and you weren't sure just which way it was going to come down.
Just watch the back wheels of Reid's Green Morgan as they land and kick up. Harrison is coming through fast from scratch, and all the lads are riding with him. Yeah, and all the Sheilas in town would be watching me if I was driving that. I'd belt it into that fast corner, I'd get on Tutton's tail and I'd go powering past him. Yeah, just like that. By McGregor's corner I'm in front, and that's the last you'll see of the Jaguar, which retires. The Allard has got Ted Reid to cope with. Crowded rest for Carisbrook, trying to make sense of it all. There are conversions to cars, though, and the essential fact that you have to keep warm, and you can light up. Dudley Waters wins. Another Morris Minor, and another Dunedin driver. Back marker. 15 seconds later, Tutton comes through, making fastest time in the Allard. Herb Gilroy from Auckland in the FSS Special is third, and then a bunch of them. Moody just holds off Reid, and Godfrey Pape rounds out the top 6. Now for the big one, 75 miles championship road race. Roycroft's out to regain the title that he lost to George Smith. The Cooper twins of Gibbons and McLean are real threats in this race. Frank Shooter's had trouble in practice. He's been twice second for the title, and he starts from the back of the grid. Arnold Stafford supervises the Norton engine in the JBSs of Frost and Jensen. Like the Red Allard, they're products of small British factories. They aim for cheap motor racing, Formula 3. The Allard is certainly not cheap. It's not small either, with a big American V8 motor there. Allards have won the Monte Carlo Rally and done well at Le Mans and in American sports car racing. And Jack Tutton has a mission too. He needs to beat the Jaguar that he's just sold to Sybil Luck. The car's businesslike. So how will it stand up against the racing cars built by New Zealanders in their own workshops, like Doug Haig's Citroën, with the track shown very much at the rear? Roycroft's ready with the Alfa Romeo. Ferrari shield on the bonnet. Fabulous car. 75 miles in front, and a tremendous history behind it. Bill Clark tells us about it.
Well, this is a copy of the official photograph of the finish of the 1935 German Grand Prix, when of course the car was driven by Tatsu Nuvolari. The other shot is of Nuvolari with the laurel wreath at the ceremony. And of course you might remember that the ceremony had to be held up because the Germans had expected a German victory and they had no record of the Italian national anthem. So Nuvolari then produced one himself.
So this was a total turn-up for the books. It was an old car then, wasn't it? Really outclassed.
It was.
And he came right through on the last lap to win.
Correct.
Talk us through that race, Bill, if you will.
What people, I think, do fail to realise is that Nuvolari lost something like 2 minutes when
2 minutes?
At the pit stop due to a faulty handle on the pump. So not only he had to make that time up, which he was doing, shall we say, towards the end of the race, he had closed in on Von Brauch, who then, of course, got a puncture. But the feeling is that even without the puncture, at the rate Nuvolari was pulling him in, that he could well have run it without the puncture. Von Brauch admittedly had to slow down because of tyre wear, and without the blowout there's a fair chance that he would have taken the race anyway.
Of course, the car wasn't quite finished then because great drivers like René Dreyfus and Louis Chiron drove it, and then it became an old racing car and they put it up for disposal.
Well, this is what happened, you see. It then was purchased by an English dealer on behalf of Austin Dobson, who was an amateur racer and a driver in England. Austin Dobson raced it for a year. That was in 1936, and then 37 it was sold to another gentleman driver by the name of Kenneth Evans.
The old Alfa Romeo came to New Zealand. Les Moore won twice with it in the Lady Wigram Trophy. And then in 1953 the Roycroft family had their first of 3 triumphant seasons with it. Bill Clark, we've got a picture here of you with the car now restored, and you've got a worried look on your face there. What's the trouble?
Well, this was taken at Sandown in 1981, and that time we were having quite a degree of clutch trouble. The type of clutch, which was a multi-plate clutch, which was suitable for 1 or 2 starts during a race, proved to be a bit difficult when you were using it more in a capacity for demonstrations.
Italian red has been replaced by New Zealand black and silver. That's not a push start, just an easing of that delicate Grand Prix clutch. The Alfa Romeo goes to join the British Racing Green JBSs at the start. Frost's JBS is on the inside of the second row. That's what we're looking at, with the Jaguars beside it. Talking of rows, here come the girls. That's the Formula Junior model in the centre of the front. Trifle understeer there, perhaps. Presentations to the Mayor and Mayoress. The girls do a cooling down lap. Attention for the anthem. Drivers fidget. Race Chairman Tommy Thompson's going to take the Mayor and Mayoress round. See what 7.6 litres can do. Percy Lupp puts the VIPs in the back. Race secretary, he gets in himself in the front. The deputy mayor and mayoress will be in the Austin, and oh dear, well, they've left the force behind. The race committee make for Bramwell's Minerva. Hick McLean's Cooper 1100 is on pole position, the red car. The delicate Alfa Romeo is wrapped up against the cold. The motorcycle engine cars are further back. They'll take a push start at the last few seconds, a hazardous proceeding in a crowded grid. Veteran motorist J.L. Passmore is the starter. They're away and McLean gets a blinder followed by Frost. And watch Shooter weave through them from the back in his white car. There are a few laggards there as well. See it all again. McLean going off fast, and watch Gibbons' pushing party on the left jump for cover at the last minute. There they go. They are nearly run down by John Horton. Sybil Lupp goes away well in number 9. Shooter's brutal-looking car coming through in the centre. There's Horton getting off, and the pushing parties rush out to the assistance of the left. The Anzani of Bill Ashton, local entry, gets away. And that's the red Alta, a pre-war British car, just taking a late start. Experienced motorcycle racer Sid Jensen isn't going too well on 4 wheels. He's going to be pushed almost the whole way to the first corner and lose about 2 minutes. He'll have a lot of ground to make up. See it all at speed, and the pushing party jump for cover. The mechanics jog back to the pits. Welcome exercise on a cold day. Lap 1 and Roycroft is a 10-second lead on Frost. Shooter's through to 5th, but what's become of Bob Gibbons in that favoured blue Cooper? He's well back.
The Cooper was half motorcycle. You see, it had a motorcycle gearbox and a Jap motorcycle air-cooled engine. And the effect of that was that you had to treat it very carefully because there was a fair inertia in the car instead of a motorcycle, and if you let in the clutch with too many revs, you'd shear the gearbox drive. And so it was always, and I always lost half a lap at the beginning of a race. Roycroft with his Alfa Romeo, which was the main opposition in that day, would get a half a lap fast, and then as we lapped at about the same speed, I was usually just made fastest lap, but I never enough to catch him. See. So the effect was that we carried out the race on opposite sides of the circuit, right, which was never very exciting either for the spectators or for us, I think.
Slowest cars are lapped almost immediately. The big fight is for 3rd place between George Smith, 44 cream and red GCS, and the similarly powered number 99 of Frank Shooter. They're hard at it. Smoke screen means Smith's piston trouble hasn't been cured. Jensen's going now, a lap behind, but running well. Roycroft's lapping at 60 miles an hour, touching 101 on the straight. The car's been geared down for this twisty circuit. The other big battle is the sports cars, and Tutton is in front of the 2 Jaguars. Lupp leading Hay. McLean's red Cooper back there after some sort of disturbance which has lost at its great start. And Tutton finds the Jaguars closer. Gibbons' knife's past a back marker. Shooter is lying 3rd now, ahead of Smith. And Sybil Lupp is almost within touching distance. Tutton's trying perhaps a little too hard. McGregor's S-bend. The Allard's on the limit, the Jaguar, and Bruce Hay's trying hard too. Patois motors through smoothly in the RA Vauxhall. There's Gibbons moving up to lap 4. Shooter looks in his mirror for George Smith. A cloud of smoke will identify him. Here comes George. The reigning champion isn't having a good day. Tutton spins under pressure from Lupp and restarts thoughtfully.
She was a real type A sort of person, absolutely driven, yes. But business was business, and you got on with it. She wasn't a lady that stayed home to cook the scones because the visitors were coming. She was out in the garage. You came on those terms. I think the Dunedin race probably did show up her ability with Jaguars, yes. She just went on from there, travelling all over the country servicing people's cars.
A couple of laps now separate the fastest from the slowest cars. Onto that tricky bridge where you go up and the wheels feel like they're in air, like a boat with its rudder out of water. Hayes now pushing up behind Tutton. Jensen's 9th. Gibbons is holding on to 2nd place. Here comes Lupp, she's 5th. The Alfa Romeo closes in on Jack Tutton, and Roycroft laps him. He's taking no prisoners today. That's where it's awkward, just at that spot. Lupp goes through, but she's now pursued by Frank Shooter, who's had to stop for water and will soon regain his place. The back marker holds up Lupp. A fist was waved from the Jaguar. Ransley's Riley is just behind, and Roycroft's following the lot of them, so he laps another 3 cars and goes into the gravel to do it. The Lupp versus Ransley battle is really hotting up. The Alta is travelling leisurely. Doug Haig's going well with the Citroën that he's built. He's passed Hay and he's done well and finished in most of the races this season. Hello, there's McLean's Cooper, it's out. Perhaps a penalty of that rapid start. The V-twin JAP engine goes no further. End of the back straight. Notice the broken condition of the road edges. Here's Del Drury's Singer Special. Like Patois' RA Vauxhall, they are veterans of the first Wigram. Ransley now is leading Lupp by quite a chunk, and she's held up by another back marker. It's McGregor's corner as the driver sees it. In, make sure you keep it tidy there, tight into the right, bit of throttle, watch for that straw bale, apex, and away. Hello, Dick Campbell's Vauxhall Special from Gore is overheating, I think. Yes. And the road is liberally top-dressed. Oil there as well as rubber. Strohan's pushing the Allard. Gibbons has had to stop for fuel, but he's just holding on to 2nd place. The Jaguar's clutch is giving trouble. Emergency at race control. There's been an accident.
We're looking up here to the exit from the bridge, Bob. I understand there was a telegraph pole up in the middle of this, which caused rather a little bit of trouble during the race itself.
On the left-hand side up there was a telegraph pole. It's not there now. And Don Ransley and the Ransley Riley, just where the Morgan is now, lifted off over the brow there and went into that.
Don's broken a leg, but he and the Riley will be back at future Dunedin events. The VIPs are trying to keep in track of it all. Smith's out, Nola Blackburn too, Horton and Ashton from Dunedin. And it's not a good day for the Heck Greenbelt cars. Harold O'Neill in the RA3 is far back after a long pit stop. Wally Dower on old 13 is motoring steadily, but he's at the back too. Pat Hoare is holding down 8th place in the RA Vauxhall. Roycroft's dominated the proceedings, and he wins the New Zealand title. Gibbons is second, followed by Frost. The Alpha does a slowing down lap, and the first New Zealand special, Frank Shooter. Only 3 New Zealand specials in the top 10. Hasn't been a good day for the sports cars either. Sybil Lupp is 7th, first Dunedin driver, but the sports car days in championship racing are almost over. Excitedly, the crowd wait to greet the famous car and its champion driver. Another worthy victory for the Alfa Romeo in its long, long career. The Mayor and Mayoress are about to become old friends. Ron Roycroft will be back to do it again in 54 and 55. Knock it back, Ron. But it's a family occasion. Ron's father is there, and his mechanics Ralph Watson and Harry Chatteris. The Mayor and Mayoress are pleased that this civic occasion has gone well. Tommy Thomson looks a little relieved and thoughtful, and Daisy Roycroft has one with her son. It's back to the country garage at Glen Murray, and driving the school bus for New Zealand's champion driver. To the car, the Champagne Corp. And they'll be back after Dunedin, Wigram, Ohakia and Mairahau victories this year to defend the New Zealand colours in the first Ardmore International Grand Prix in 6 months' time.
English motor racing driver and Vice President of Motorsport's international governing body, Earl Howe, sent this very telegram in response to the Otago Club's invitation to write the foreword to the 1953 programme. And this is what he wrote. Delighted. Do best to help you. Please forward details of the event. Airmail will reply forthwith. Signed, Howe. Many thousands of people watched the first race, and crowds of enthusiasts continued to encourage Earl Howe's expression of hope become a reality. The event was repeated here and around Dunedin's oval circuit 23 times, and international drivers, Whitehead, Parnell and Brabham amongst them, competed against our own world-class drivers, Bruce McLaren, Chris Amon and world champion Denny Hulme.